Chapter 13. Inflow of new thoughts can remake you. One of the most important and powerful facts about you is expressed in the following statement by William James, who is one of the wisest men America has produced. William James said, "The greatest discovery of my generation is that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind. As you think, so shall you be. So flush out all old, tired, worn-out thoughts. Fill your mind with fresh, new creative thoughts of faith, love, and goodness. By this process you can actually remake your life." And where do you find such personality remaking thoughts? I know a business executive, a modest man, but the type of individual who is never defeated. No problem, no setback, no opposition ever gets him down. He simply attacks each difficulty with an optimistic attitude and a sure confidence that it will work out right, and, in some strange way, it always does for him. He seems to have a magic touch on life, a touch that never fails. Because of that impressive characteristic, this man always interested me. I knew there was a definite explanation of his being this way and of course wanted to hear his story, but in view of his modesty and reticence it was not easy to persuade him to talk about himself. One day when he was in the mood he told me his secret, an amazingly simple but effective secret. I was visiting his plant, a modern, up-to-date structure, much of it air-conditioned. Latest type machinery and methods of production make it a factory of outstanding efficiency. Labor management relations seem as nearly perfect as is possible among imperfect human beings. A spirit of goodwill pervades the entire organization. His office is ultra-modernistically decorated and furnished with handsome desks, rugs, and paneled with exotic woods. The decorating scheme is 5 startling colors blended together pleasantly. All in all, it is the last word, and then some. Imagine, then, my surprise to see on his highly polished white mahogany desk an old battered copy of the Bible. It was the only old object in those ultra-modern rooms. I commented upon this seemingly strange inconsistency. "That book," he replied, pointing to the Bible, "is the most up-to-date thing in this plant. Equipment wears out and furnishing styles change, but that book is so far ahead of us that it never gets out of date. When I went to college, my good Christian mother gave me that Bible with the suggestion that if I would read and practice its teachings, I would learn how to get through life successfully. But I thought she was just a nice old lady." He chuckled. At my age she seemed old. She wasn't really, and to humor her, I took the Bible, but for years practically never looked at it. I thought I didn't need it. "Well," he continued slangily, "I was a dope. I was stupid, and I got my life in a terrible mess. Everything went wrong primarily because I was wrong. I was thinking wrong, acting wrong, doing wrong. I succeeded at nothing, failed at everything. Now I realized that my principal trouble was wrong thinking. I was negative, resentful, cocky, opinionated. Nobody could tell me anything. I thought I knew everything. I was filled with gripes at everybody. Little wonder nobody liked me. I certainly was a washout." So ran his dismal story. One night in going through some papers, he continued, I came across the long-forgotten Bible. It brought up old memories and I started aimlessly to read it. Do you know, it is strange how things happen, how in just a flashing moment of time everything becomes different. Well, as I read, a sentence leaped up at me, a sentence that changed my life, and when I say changed, I mean changed. From the minute I read that sentence, everything has been different, tremendously different. What is this wonderful sentence? I wanted to know, and he quoted it slowly. "The Lord is the strength of my life, ... I in this will I be confident." I don't know why that one line affected me so, he went on, but it did. I know now that I was weak and a failure because I had no faith, no confidence. I was very negative, a defeatist. Something happened inside my mind. I guess I had what they call a spiritual experience. My thought pattern shifted from negative to positive. I decided to put my faith in God and sincerely do my best, trying to follow the principles outlined in the Bible. As I did so, I began to get hold of a new set of thoughts. I began to think differently. In time, my old failure thoughts were flushed out by this new spiritual experience, and an inflow of new thoughts gradually but actually remade me. So concluded the story of this businessman. He altered his thinking, and the new thoughts which flowed and displaced the old thoughts which had been defeating him, and his life was changed. This incident illustrates an important fact about human nature. You can think your way to failure and unhappiness, but you can also think your way to success and happiness. The world in which you live is not primarily determined by outward conditions and circumstances, but by thoughts that habitually occupy your mind. Remember the wise words of Marcus Aurelius, one of the great thinkers of antiquity, who said, "A man's life is what his thoughts make of it." It has been said that the wisest man who ever lived in America was Ralph Waldo Emerson, the sage of Concord. Emerson declared, "A man is what he thinks about all day long." A famous psychologist says, "There is a deep tendency in human nature to become precisely like that which you habitually imagine yourself to be." It has been said that thoughts are things, that they actually possess dynamic power. Judged by the power they exercise, one can readily accept such an appraisal. You can actually think yourself into or out of situations. You can make yourself ill with your thoughts, and by the same token you can make yourself well by the use of a different and healing type of thought. Think one way and you attract the conditions which that type of thinking indicates. Think another way and you can create an entirely different set of conditions. Conditions are created by thoughts far more powerfully than conditions create thoughts. Think positively, for example, and you set in motion positive forces which bring positive results to pass. Positive thoughts create around yourself an atmosphere propitious to the development of positive outcomes. On the contrary, think negative thoughts and you create around yourself an atmosphere propitious to the development of negative results. To change your circumstances, first start thinking differently. Do not passively accept unsatisfactory circumstances, but form a picture in your mind of circumstances as they should be. Hold that picture, develop it firmly in all details, believe in it, pray about it, work at it, and you can actualize it according to that mental image emphasized in your positive thinking. This is one of the greatest laws in the universe. Fervently do I wish I had discovered it as a very young man. It dawned upon me much later in life, and I have found it to be one of the greatest, if not my greatest discovery, outside of my relationship to God. And in a deep sense, this law is a factor in one's relationship with God because it channels God's power into personality. This great law, briefly and simply stated, is that if you think in negative terms, you will get negative results. If you think in positive terms, you will achieve positive results. That is the simple fact which is at the basis of an astonishing law of prosperity and success. In 3 words, believe and succeed. I learned this law in a very interesting manner. Some years ago, a group of us consisting of Lowell Thomas, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, Branch Rickey, Raymond Thornburg, and others established an inspirational self-help magazine called Guideposts. This magazine has a double function. First, by relating stories of people who through their faith have overcome difficulties, it teaches techniques of victorious living, victory over fear, over circumstances, over obstacles, over resentment. It teaches faith over all manner of negativism. Second, as a non-profit, non-sectarian, interfaith publication, it teaches the great fact that God is in the stream of history and that this nation was founded on belief in God and His laws. The magazine reminds its readers that America is the first great nation in history to be established on a definitely religious premise, and that unless we keep it so, our freedoms will deteriorate. Mr. Raymond Thornburg is publisher, and I as editor, in starting the magazine had no financial backing to underwrite it. It was begun on faith. In fact, its first offices were in rooms above a grocery store in the little village of Pawling, New York. There was a borrowed typewriter, a few rickety chairs, and that was all except a great idea and great faith. Slowly a subscription list of 25,000 developed. The future seemed promising. Suddenly one night fire broke out, and within an hour the publishing house was destroyed, and with it the total list of subscribers. Foolishly, no duplicate list had been made. Lowell Thomas, loyal and efficient patron of Guideposts from the very start, mentioned this sad circumstance on his radio broadcast, and as a result we soon had 30,000 subscribers, practically all the old ones and many new ones. The subscription list rose to approximately 40,000, but costs increased even more rapidly. The magazine, which has always been sold for less than cost in order widely to disseminate the message, was more expensive than anticipated, and we were faced with difficult financial problems. In fact, at one time it seemed almost impossible to keep it going. At this juncture we called a meeting, and I'm sure you never attended a more pessimistic, negative, discouraging meeting. It dripped with pessimism. Where were we going to get the money to pay our bills? We figured out ways of robbing Peter to pay Paul. Complete discouragement filled our minds. A woman had been invited to this meeting whom we all regarded most highly. But one reason she was included in this meeting was because, on a previous occasion, she had contributed $2,000 to help inaugurate Guideposts magazine. It was hoped that lightning might strike twice in the same place. But this time she gave us something of more value than money. As this dismal meeting progressed, she remained silent for a long time, but finally said, "I suppose you gentlemen would like me to make another financial contribution. I might as well put you out of your misery. I am not going to give you another cent." This did not put us out of our misery. On the contrary, it put us deeper into our misery. "But," she continued, "I will give you something far more valuable than money." This astonished us, for we could not possibly imagine anything of more value than money in the circumstances. "I am going to give you an idea," she continued, "a creative idea." Well, we thought to ourselves unenthusiastically, how can we pay our bills with an idea? But an idea is just what will help you pay bills. Every achievement in this world was first projected as a creative idea. First the idea, then faith in it, then the means of implementing the idea. That is the way success proceeds. "Now," she said, "here is the idea. What is your present trouble? It is that you lack everything. You lack money, you lack subscribers, you lack equipment, you lack ideas, you lack courage. Why do you lack all these requirements? Simply because you are thinking lack. If you think lack, you create the conditions that produce a state of lack. By this constant mental emphasis upon what you lack, you have frustrated the creative forces that can give impetus to the development of guideposts. You have been working hard from the standpoint of doing many things, but you have failed to do the one all-important thing that will lend power to all your other efforts. You have not employed positive thinking. Instead, you have thought in terms of lack. To correct that situation, reverse the mental process and begin to think prosperity, achievement, success. This will require practice, but it can be done quickly if you will demonstrate faith. The process is to visualize, that is, to see guideposts in terms of successful achievement. Create a mental picture of guideposts as a great magazine sweeping the country. Visualize large numbers of subscribers, all eagerly reading this inspirational material and profiting thereby. Create a mental image of lives being changed by the philosophy of achievement which Guideposts teaches monthly in its issues. Do not hold mental pictures of difficulties and failures, but lift your mind above them and visualize powers and achievements. When you elevate your thoughts into the area of visualized attainment, you look down on your problems rather than from below up at them, and thus you get a much more encouraging view of them. Always come up over your problems. Never approach a problem below. Now let me continue further, she said. How many subscribers do you need at the moment to keep going? We thought quickly and said 100,000. We had 40,000. All right, she said confidently, that is not hard. That is easy. Visualize 100,000 people being creatively helped by this magazine and you will have them. In fact, the minute you can see them in your mind, you will have them. She turned to me and said, Norman, can you see 100,000 subscribers at this minute? Look out there, look ahead of you. In your mind's eye, can you see them? I wasn't convinced as yet, and I said rather doubtfully, well, maybe so, but they seem pretty dim to me. She was a little disappointed in me, I thought, as she asked, can't you imaginatively visualize 100,000 subscribers? I guess my imagination wasn't working very well because all I could see was the insufficient but actual 40,000. Then she turned to my old friend Raymond Thornburg, who has been blessed with a gloriously victorious personality, and she said, calling him by his nickname, Pinky, can you visualize 100,000 subscribers? I rather doubted that Pinky would see them. He is a rubber manufacturer who gives his time freely from his own business to help advance this inspirational, non-profit magazine, and you would not ordinarily think that a rubber manufacturer would respond to this type of thinking. But he has the faculty of creative imagination. I noticed by the fascinated look on his face that she had him. He was gazing straight ahead with rather a look of wonder when she asked, do you see the 100,000 subscribers? Yes, he cried with eagerness, yes, I do see them. Electrified, I demanded, where? Point them out to me. Then I, too, began to visualize them. Now, continued our friend, let us bow our heads and together thank God for giving us 100,000 subscribers. Frankly, I thought that was pushing the Lord rather hard, but it was justified by a verse in the scriptures where it says, and all things whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing, ye shall receive them. That means when you pray for something, at the same time visualize what you pray for. Believe that if it is God's will and is worthwhile, not selfishly sought after, but for human good, that it is at that moment given you. If you have difficulty in following this reasoning, let me tell you that from that moment until the present writing Guideposts never lacked for anything. It has found wonderful friends and has had fine support. It has been able always to meet its bills, purchase needed equipment, finance itself. And as I write these words, Guideposts is nearing the 500,000 mark and more subscriptions are coming in regularly, sometimes as many as 3,000 or 4,000 per day. I recite this instance not for the purpose of advertising Guideposts, although I strongly recommend this magazine to all my readers, and if you would like to be a subscriber, write to Guideposts, Pawling, New York, for information. But I tell the story because I was awed by this experience, realizing that I had stumbled upon a law, a tremendous law of personal victory. I decided to apply it thereafter to my own problems, and wherever I have done so can report a marvelous result. Wherever I have failed to do so, I have missed great results. It is as simple as this: put your problem in God's hands. In your thoughts rise above the problem so that you look down upon it, not up at it. Test it according to God's will. That is, do not try to get success from something that is wrong. Be sure it is right morally, spiritually, and ethically. You can never get a right result from an error. If your thinking is wrong, it is wrong and not right and can never be right so long as it is wrong. If it is wrong in the essence, it is bound to be wrong in the result. Therefore be sure it is right, then hold it up in God's name and visualize a great result. Keep the idea of prosperity, of achievement, and of attainment firmly fixed in your mind. Never entertain a failure thought. Should a negative thought of defeat come into your mind, expel it by increasing the positive affirmation. Affirm aloud, God is now giving me success. He is now giving me attainment. The mental vision which you create and firmly hold in consciousness will be actualized if you continually affirm it in your thoughts and if you work diligently and effectively. This creative process, simply stated, is visualize, prayerize, and finally actualize. People in all walks of life who accomplish notable achievements know the value of this law in their experience. Henry J. Kaiser told me that at one time he was building a levee along a riverbank, and there came a great storm and flood which buried all his earth-moving machinery and destroyed the work that had been done. Upon going out to observe the damage after the water receded, he found his workers standing around glumly looking at the mud and the buried machinery. He came among them and said with a smile, "Why are you so glum? Don't you see what has happened?" They asked, "Our machinery is covered with mud." "What mud?" he asked brightly. "What mud?" they repeated in astonishment. "Look around you. It is a sea of mud." "Oh," he laughed, "I don't see any mud." "But how can you say that?" they asked him. "Because," said Mr. Kaiser, "I am looking up at a clear blue sky and there is no mud up there. There is only sunshine, and I never saw any mud that could stand against sunshine. Soon it will be dried up, and then you will be able to move your machinery and start all over again." How right he is. If your eyes are looking down in the mud and you feel a sense of failure, you will create defeat for yourself. Optimistic visualization combined with prayer and faith will inevitably actualize achievement. Another friend of mine who started from the lowliest beginnings has performed some outstanding achievements. I remember him in his school days as an awkward, unprepossessing, very shy country boy. But he had character and one of the keenest brains I have ever encountered. Today he is an outstanding man in his line. I asked him, "What is the secret of your success?" "The people who have worked with me across the years and the unlimited opportunity given any boy in the United States of America," he replied. "Yes, I know that is true, but I am sure you must have some personal technique, and I would be interested in having it," I said. "It all lies in how you think about problems," he replied. "I attack a problem and shake it to pieces with my mind. I put all the mental power I have upon it. Second, I pray about it most sincerely. Third, I paint a mental picture of success. Fourth, I always ask myself, what is the right thing to do?" For, he said, nothing will be right if it is wrong. Nothing that is wrong will ever come out right. Fifth, I give it all I've got. But let me emphasize again, he concluded, if you're thinking defeat, change your thoughts at once. Get new and positive thoughts. That is primary and basic in overcoming difficulties and in achieving. At this very minute, as you read this book, potential ideas are in your mind. By releasing and developing these ideas, you can solve your financial problem, your business situation, you can care for yourself and your family, and attain success in your ventures. A steady inflow and practical use of these creative thoughts can remake your life and you along with it. There was a time when I acquiesced in the silly idea that there is no relationship between faith and prosperity, that when one talked about religion he should never relate it to achievement, that it dealt only with ethics and morals or social values. But now I realize that such a viewpoint limits the power of God in the development of the individual. Religion teaches that there is a tremendous power in the universe and that this power can dwell in personality. It is a power that can blast out all defeat and lift a person above all difficult situations. We have seen the demonstration of atomic energy. We know that astonishing and enormous energy exists in the universe. This same force of energy is resident in the human mind. Nothing on earth is greater than the human mind in potential power. The average individual is capable of much greater achievement than he has ever realized. This is true regardless of who is reading this statement. When you actually learn to release yourself, you will discover that your mind contains ideas of such creative value that you need not lack anything. By the full and proper use of your power stimulated by God power, you can make your life successful. You can make just about anything of your life, anything you will believe or will visualize, anything you will pray for and work for. Look deeply into your mind. Amazing wonders are there. Whatever your situation may be, you can improve it. First, quiet your mind so that inspirations may rise from its depths. Believe that God is now helping you. Visualize achievement. Organize your life on a spiritual basis so that God's principles work within you. Hold firmly in your mind a picture not of failure but of success. Do these things and creative thoughts will flow freely from your mind. This is an amazing law, one that can change anybody's life including your own. An inflow of new thoughts can remake you regardless of every difficulty you may now face, and I repeat, every difficulty. In the last analysis, the basic reason a person fails to live a creative and successful life is because of error within himself. He thinks wrong. He needs to correct the error in his thoughts. He needs to practice right thinking. When the 23rd Psalm says, "He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness," it not only means the paths of goodness, but the paths of right-mindedness as well. When Isaiah says, "Let the wicked forsake his way and the unrighteous man his thoughts," it not only means that a person is to depart from evil and do good, but that he is to change his thinking from wrong to right, from error to truth. The great secret of successful living is to reduce the amount of error in oneself and increase the amount of truth. An inflow of new, right, health-laden thoughts through the mind creatively affects the circumstances of life, for truth always produces right procedures and therefore right results. Years ago I knew a young man who for a while was one of the most complete personality failures in my entire experience. He had a delightful personality, but he failed at everything. A person would employ him and be enthusiastic about him, but soon his enthusiasm would cool and it was not long until he was out of that position. This failure pattern was repeated many times. He was a failure as a person as well as an employee. He missed connections with everything. He just couldn't do anything right, and he used to ask me, what is wrong with me that everything goes wrong? Still, he had a lot of conceit. He was cocky and smug, and had the irritating habit of blaming everybody but himself. Something was wrong with every office with which he was connected or every organization that employed him. He blamed everybody else for his failures, never himself. He would never look inside himself. It never occurred to him that anything could be wrong with him. One night, however, he wanted to talk with me, and as I had to make a drive of about 100 miles to deliver a speech, he drove there and back with me. On our return, we stopped along about midnight at a roadside stand for a hamburger and a cup of coffee. I don't know what was in that hamburger sandwich, but since this incident I have had a new respect for hamburgers, for of a sudden he shouted, "I've got it. I've got it." "You've got what?" I asked in astonishment. "I've got the answer. Now I know what's the trouble with me. It's that everything goes wrong with me because I myself am wrong." I clapped my hand on his back and said, "Boy, at last you are on your way." "Why, it's as clear as a crystal," he said. "I have been thinking wrong, and as a result I have created wrong outcomes." By this time we were out in the moonlight standing alongside my car, and I said to him, "Harry, you must go one step further and ask God to make you right inwardly." I quoted this passage from the Bible, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Get the truth into your mind and you will be free of your failures. He became an enthusiastic practicing follower of Jesus Christ. Through real faith and a complete change of thoughts and personal habits, wrong thinking and wrong acting were removed from his nature. He straightened out by developing a right pattern instead of an error pattern. When he was made right, then everything began to go right for him. Following are 7 practical steps for changing your mental attitudes from negative to positive, for releasing creative new thoughts, and for shifting from error patterns to truth patterns. Try them, keep on trying them. They will work. 1. For the next 24 hours, deliberately speak hopefully about everything, about your job, about your health, about your future. Go out of your way to talk optimistically about everything. This will be difficult, for possibly it is your habit to talk pessimistically. From this negative habit you must restrain yourself even if it requires an act of will. 2. After speaking hopefully for 24 hours, continue the practice for 1 week, then you can be permitted to be realistic for a day or 2. You will discover that what you meant by realistic a week ago was actually pessimistic. But what you now mean by realistic is something entirely different. It is the dawning of the positive outlook. When most people say they are being realistic, they delude themselves. They are simply being negative. 3. You must feed your mind even as you feed your body, and to make your mind healthy you must feed it nourishing, wholesome thoughts. Therefore, today start to shift your mind from negative to positive thinking. Start at the beginning of the New Testament and underscore every sentence about faith. Continue doing this until you have marked every such passage in the 4 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Particularly note Mark 11, verses 22, 23, 24. They will serve as samples of the verses you are to underscore and fix deeply in your consciousness. 4. Then commit the underscored passages to memory. Commit 1 each day until you can recite the entire list from memory. This will take time, but remember you have consumed much more time becoming a negative thinker than this will require. Effort and time will be needed to unlearn your negative pattern. 5. Make a list of your friends to determine who is the most positive thinker among them and deliberately cultivate his society. Do not abandon your negative friends, but get closer to those with a positive point of view for a while until you have absorbed their spirit. Then you can go back among your negative friends and give them your newly acquired thought pattern without taking on their negativism. 6. Avoid argument, but whenever a negative attitude is expressed, counter with a positive and optimistic opinion. 7. Pray a great deal and always let your prayer take the form of thanksgiving on the assumption that God is giving you great and wonderful things, for if you think He is, He surely is. God will not give you any greater blessing than you can believe in. He wants to give you great things, but even He cannot make you take anything greater than you are equipped by faith to receive. According to your faith be it unto you. The secret of a better and more successful life is to cast out those old, dead, unhealthy thoughts. Substitute for them new, vital, dynamic faith thoughts. You can depend upon it. An inflow of new thought will remake you in your life. Chapter 14. Relax for easy power. Every night in these United States more than 6 million sleeping tablets are required to put the American people to sleep. This startling statement was made to me several years ago by a drug manufacturer at a convention of that industry where I was giving a speech. Though his assertion seemed incredible, I have been told by others who are in a position to know that the above estimate is now an understatement. In fact, I heard another good authority assert that the American people are using about 12 million doses of sleeping tablets per day. That is enough to put every 12th American to sleep tonight. Statistics show that the use of sleeping tablets has risen 1,000% in recent years. But a more recent statement is even more startling. According to the vice president of a large drug manufacturing concern, approximately 7 billion one-half-grain tablets are consumed yearly, which works out at about 19 million tablets per night. What a pathetic situation. Sleep is a natural restorative process. One would think that any person after a day's work would be able to sleep peacefully, but apparently Americans have even lost the art of sleeping. In fact, so keyed up are they that a minister with ample opportunity to test the matter, must report that the American people are so nervous and high-strung that now it is almost next to impossible to put them to sleep with a sermon. It has been years since I have seen anyone sleep in church, and that is a sad situation. A Washington official who loves to juggle figures, especially astronomical figures, told me that last year in the United States there was a total of 7.5 billion headaches. This works itself out at approximately 50 headaches per head per annum. Have you had your quota yet this year? Just how this official arrived at these figures he did not say, but shortly after our conversation I noticed a report that in a recent year the drug industry sold 11 million pounds of aspirin. Perhaps this era might appropriately be termed the aspirin age, as one author has called it. An authoritative source declares that every other hospital bed in the United States is occupied by a patient who was put there not because he encountered a germ or had an accident or developed an organic malady, but because of his inability to organize and discipline his emotions. In a clinic, 500 patients were examined hand-running and 386, or 77%, were found to be ill of psychosomatic difficulties, physical illness caused largely by unhealthy mental states. Another clinic made a study of a large number of ulcer cases and reported that nearly half were made ill, not as the result of physical troubles, but because the patients worried too much or hated too much, had too much guilt, or were tension victims. A doctor from still another clinic made the observation that in his opinion medical men, despite all extraordinary scientific developments, are now able to heal by the means of science alone less than half the maladies brought them. He declares that in many cases patients are sending back into their bodies the diseased thoughts of their minds. Prominent among these diseased thoughts are anxiety and tension. This unhappy situation has become so serious that in our own Marble Collegiate Church, 5th Avenue at 29th Street, New York City, we now have 12 psychiatrists on the staff under the supervision of Dr. Smiley Blanton. Why psychiatrists on the staff of a church? The answer is that psychiatry is a science. Its function is the analysis, diagnosis, and treatment of human nature according to certain well-authenticated laws and procedures. Christianity may also be thought of as a science. It is a philosophy, a system of theology, a system of metaphysics, and a system of worship. It also works itself out in moral and ethical codes. But Christianity also has the characteristics of a science in that it is based upon a book which contains a system of techniques and formulas designed for the understanding and treatment of human nature. The laws are so precise and have been so often demonstrated when proper conditions of understanding, belief, and practice are applied that religion may be said to form an exact science. When a person comes to our clinic, the first counselor is perhaps a psychiatrist who in a kindly and careful manner studies the problem and tells the patient why he does what he does. This is a most important fact to learn. Why, for example, have you had an inferiority complex all your life long? Or why have you been haunted by fear? Or, again, why do you nurse resentment? Why have you always been shy and reticent? Or why do you do stupid things or make inept statements? These phenomena of your human nature do not just happen. There is a reason why you do what you do, and it is an important day in your life experience when at last you discover the reason. Self-knowledge is the beginning of self-correction. Following the self-knowledge process, the psychiatrist turns the patient over to the pastor who tells him how to do what he ought to do. The pastor applies to the case, in scientific and systematic form, the therapies of prayer, faith, and love. The psychiatrist and the minister pool their knowledge and combine their therapies with the result that many people have found new life and happiness. The minister does not attempt to be a psychiatrist nor the psychiatrist a pastor. Each performs his own function but always in cooperation. The Christianity utilized in this procedure is the undiluted teachings of Jesus Christ, Lord and Savior of man's life. We believe in the practical, absolute workability of the teachings of Jesus. We believe that we can indeed do all things through Christ. The gospel as we work with it proves to be a literal fulfillment of the astonishing promise, "Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man, the things which God hath prepared for them that love him." Believe in his system of thought and practice, believe and you will overcome all fear, hate, inferiority, guilt, and every form and manner of defeat. In other words, no good thing is too good to be true. You have never seen, never heard, never even imagined the things God will give to those who love him. In the work of the clinic, one frequent problem is that of tension. This, to a very large degree, may be called the prevailing malady of the American people. But not only the American people seem to suffer from tension. The Royal Bank of Canada some time ago devoted its monthly letter to this problem under the title, Let's Slow Down, and says in part, this monthly letter does not set itself up as a counselor of mental and physical health, but it is attempting to break down a problem that bedevils every adult person in Canada and, I might add, in the United States as well. The bank letter goes on to say, we are victims of a mounting tension, we have difficulty in relaxing. Our high-strung nervous systems are on a perpetual binge. Caught up as we are in the rush all day, every day, and far into the night, we are not living fully. We must remember what Carlyle called the calm supremacy of the spirit over its circumstances. When a prominent banking institution calls to the attention of its customers the fact that they are failing to derive from life what they really want from it because they have become victims of tension, it is certainly time something was done about the situation. In St. Petersburg, Florida, I actually saw a machine on the street equipped with a sign, what is your blood pressure? You could put a coin in a slot and get the bad news. When you can buy a reading on blood pressure like you buy gum out of a slot machine, it indicates that many people have this problem. One of the simplest methods for reducing tension is to practice the easy does it attitude. Do everything more slowly, less hectically, and without pressure. My friend Branch Rickey, famous baseball man, told me that he would not use a player no matter how well he hits, fields, or runs if he is guilty of overpressing. To be a successful big league baseball player, there must be a flow of easy power through every action and of course through the mind. The most effective way to hit a ball is by the easy method, where all the muscles are flexible and operating in correlated power. Try to kill the ball and you will slice it or maybe miss it altogether. This is true in golf, in baseball, in every sport. From 1907 through 1919, except for 1 year, 1916, Ty Cobb's batting average led the American League, a record so far as I know that has never been surpassed. Ty Cobb presented the bat with which he performed his extraordinary feats to a friend of mine. I was permitted to take this bat in my hand, which I did with considerable awe. In the spirit of the game I struck a pose, as if to bat. Doubtless my batting stance was not in any sense reminiscent of the immortal slugger. In fact, my friend, who was himself at one time a minor league baseball player, chuckled and said, Ty Cobb would never do it that way. You are too rigid, too tense. You are obviously overtrying. You would probably strike out. It was beautiful to watch Ty Cobb. The man and the bat were one. It was a study in rhythm, and one marveled at the ease with which he got into the swing. He was a master of easy power. It is the same in all success. Analyze people who are really efficient and they always seem to do things easily with a minimum of effort. In so doing they release maximum power. One of my friends, a famous businessman who handles important affairs and varied interests, always seems to be at ease. He does everything efficiently and quickly but is never in a dither. He never has that anxious, frazzled look on his face which marks people who cannot handle either their time or their work. I inquired the secret of his obviously easy power. He smiled and replied, oh, it isn't much of a secret. I just try keep myself in tune with God. That's all. Every morning after breakfast, he explained, my wife and I go into the living room for a period of quietness. One of us reads aloud some inspirational piece to get us into the mood of meditation. It may be a poem or a few paragraphs of a book. Following that we sit quietly, each praying or meditating according to his own mood and manner. Then together we affirm the thought that God is filling us with strength and quiet energy. This is a definite 15-minute ritual and we never miss it. We couldn't get along without it. We would crack up. As a result, I always seem to feel that I have more energy than I need and more power than is required. So said this efficient man who demonstrates easy power. I know a number of men and women who practice this or similar techniques for reducing tension. It is becoming a quite general and popular procedure nowadays. One February morning I was rushing down the long veranda of a Florida hotel with a handful of mail just in from my office in New York. I had come to Florida for a midwinter vacation, but hadn't seemed to get out of the routine of dealing with my mail the first thing in the morning. As I hurried by, headed for a couple of hours' work with the mail, a friend from Georgia who was sitting in a rocking chair with his hat partially over his eyes stopped me in my headlong rush and said in his slow and pleasant southern drawl, "Where are you rushing for, doctor? That's no way to do down here in the Florida sunshine. Come over here and sit in one of these rocking chairs and help me practice one of the greatest of the arts." Mystified, I said, "Help you practice one of the greatest of the arts?" "Yes," he replied, "an art that is passing out. Not many people know how to do it anymore." "Well," I asked, "please tell me what it is. I don't see you practicing any art." "Oh, yes, I am," he said. "I am practicing the art of just sittin' in the sun. Sit here and let the sun fall on your face. It is warm like and it smells good. It makes you feel peaceful inside. Did you ever think about the sun?" he asked. "It never hurries, never gets excited, it just works slowly and makes no noise, doesn't push any buzzers, doesn't answer any telephones, doesn't ring any bells, just goes on a-shining, and the sun does more work in the fraction of an instant than you and I could ever do in a lifetime. Think of what it does. It causes the flowers to bloom, keeps the trees growing, warms the earth, causes the fruit and vegetables to grow and the crops to ripen, lifts water to send back on the earth, and it makes you feel peaceful like. I find that when I sit in the sun and let the sun work on me, it puts some rays into me that give me energy. That is, when I take time to sit in the sun. So throw that mail over in the corner, he said, and sit down here with me. I did so, and when finally I went to my room and got at my mail, I finished it in no time at all. Then there was a good part of the day left for vacation activities and for more sittin' in the sun. Of course, I know a lot of lazy people who have been sittin' in the sun all their lives and never amounted to anything. There is a difference between sittin' and relaxing and just sittin'. But if you sit and relax and think about God and get yourself in tune with Him and open yourself to the flow of His power, then sittin' is not laziness. In fact, it is about the best way to renew power. It produces driving energy, the kind of energy you drive, not the kind that drives you. The secret is to keep the mind quiet, avoiding all hectic reactions of haste, and to practice peaceful thinking. The essence of the art is to keep the tempo down, to perform your responsibilities on the basis of the most efficient conservation of energy. It is advisable to adopt 1 or 2 workable plans through the use of which you can become expert in the practice of relaxed and easy power. One of the best such plans was suggested to me by Captain Eddie Rickenbacker. A very busy man, he manages to handle his responsibilities in a manner indicating reserves of power. I found one element of his secret quite by accident. I was filming a program for television with him. We had been assured that the work could be done quickly, leaving him free to go to the many other matters on his daily agenda. However, the filming was long delayed beyond the time anticipated. I noted, however, that the captain showed no signs of agitation. He did not become nervous or anxious. He did not pace up and down, putting in frantic calls to his office. Instead, he accepted the situation gracefully. There were a couple of old rocking chairs at the studio, apparently intended for use in a set other than ours. He sat in one rocker in a very relaxed manner. I have always been a great admirer of Eddie Rickenbacker, and I commented on his lack of tension. "I know how busy you are," I said, "and I marvel at the way you sit quiet, composed, and peaceful like." For myself, I was a bit disturbed, largely because I regretted to take so much of Captain Rickenbacker's time. "How can you be so imperturbable?" I asked. He laughingly replied, "Oh, I just practice what you preach. Come on, easy does it. Sit down here beside me." I pulled up the other rocking chair and did a little relaxing on my own. Then I said, "Eddie, I know you have some technique to attain this impressive serenity. Tell me about it, please." He is a modest man, but because of my persistence he gave me a formula which he says he uses frequently. I now use it myself and it is very effective. It may be described as follows. First, collapse physically. Practice this several times a day. Let go every muscle in the body. Conceive of yourself as a jellyfish, getting your body into complete looseness. Form a mental picture of a huge burlap bag of potatoes. Then mentally cut the bag, allowing the potatoes to roll out. Think of yourself as the bag. What is more relaxed than an empty burlap bag? The second element in the formula is to drain the mind. Several times each day drain the mind of all irritation, all resentment, disappointment, frustration, and annoyance. Unless you drain the mind frequently and regularly, these unhappy thoughts will accumulate until a major blasting out process will be necessary. Keep the mind drained of all factors which would impede the flow of relaxed power. Third, think spiritually. To think spiritually means to turn the mind at regular intervals to God. At least 3 times a day lift up your eyes unto the hills. This keeps you in tune with God's harmony. It refills you with peace. This 3-point program greatly impressed me, and I have been practicing it for some months. It is an excellent method for relaxing and living on the basis of easy does it. From my friend Dr. Z. Taylor Berkowitz of New York City, I have learned much of the art of working relaxed. Often when under pressure, with an office full of patients and telephone calls coming in, he will suddenly stop, lean against his desk, and talk to the Lord in a manner both natural and respectful. I like the style of his prayer. He tells me that it runs something like this: "Look, Lord, I am pushing myself too hard. I am getting jittery. Here I am counseling people to practice quietness, now I must practice it. Touch me with your healing peace. Give me composure, quietness, strength, and conserve my nervous energy so that I can help these people who come to me." He stands quietly for a minute or two. Then he thanks the Lord and proceeds with full but easy power to do his work. Often in making sick calls about the city he finds himself in a traffic jam. He has a most interesting method of using these potentially irritating delays as opportunities to relax. Shutting off his engine, he slumps in his seat, putting his head back, closing his eyes, and has even been known to go to sleep. He says there is no reason to be concerned about going to sleep because the strident honking of horns will awaken him when traffic begins to move. These interludes of complete relaxation in the midst of traffic last for only a minute or two, but they have energy renewal value. It is surprising how many minutes or fractions of minutes during the day you can use to rest where you are. If even in such fractional periods you deliberately draw on God's power, you can maintain adequate relaxation. It isn't length of relaxation time that produces power, it is the quality of the experience. I am told that Roger Babson, the famous statistician, frequently goes into an empty church and sits quietly. Perhaps he reads 1 or 2 hymns and in so doing finds rest and renewal. Dale Carnegie, under tension, goes to a church near his New York City office to spend a quarter hour in prayerful meditation. He says he leaves his office for this purpose when busiest. This demonstrates control of time rather than being controlled by it. It also indicates watchfulness lest tension develop beyond a controllable degree. I encountered a friend on a train from Washington to New York one night. This man is a member of Congress and he explained that he was on his way to his district to speak at a meeting of his constituents. The particular group he was about to address was hostile to him, he said, and would probably try to make things very difficult for him. Although they represented a minority in his district, he was going to face them just the same. They are American citizens and I am their representative. They have a right to meet with me if they want to. You do not seem to be much worried about it, I commented. No, he answered, if I get worried about it, then I will be upset and will not handle the situation well. Do you have any particular method for handling such a tense situation? I asked. Oh, yes, he replied, they will be a noisy crowd. But I have my own way of meeting such situations without tension. I will breathe deeply, talk quietly, speak sincerely, be friendly and respectful, hold my temper, and trust in God to see me through. I have learned one important fact, the congressman continued, and that is in any situation be relaxed, keep calm, take a friendly attitude, have faith. Do your best. Do this, and usually you can make things come out all right. I have no doubt about the ability of this congressman to live and work without tension and, what is more, successfully to attain his objectives. When we were doing some construction work at my farm in Pawling, New York, I watched a workman swinging a shovel. He was shoveling a pile of sand. It was a beautiful sight. Stripped to the waist, his lean and muscular body worked with precision and correlation. The shovel rose and fell in perfect rhythm. He would push the shovel into the pile, lean his body against it, and drive it deep into the sand. Then, in a clear, free swing it came up and the sand was deposited without a break in the motion. Again the shovel went back into the sand, again his body leaned against it, again the shovel lifted easily in a perfect arc. One almost had a feeling that he could sing in rhythm to the motion of this workman. Indeed, the man did sing as he worked. I was not surprised when the foreman told me that he is considered one of his best workmen. The foreman also spoke of him as good-humored, happy, and a pleasant person with whom to work. Here was a relaxed man who lived with joyous power, master of the art of easy does it. Relaxation results from recreation, and the process of recreation should be continuous. The human being is meant to be attached to a continual flow of force that proceeds from God through the individual and back to God for renewal. When one lives in tune with this constantly recreative process, he learns the indispensable quality to relax and work on the basis of easy does it. Now, how to master this skill. Here are 10 rules for taking the hard way out of your job. Try these proven methods for working hard easily. They will help you to relax and have easy power. 1. Don't get the idea that you are Atlas carrying the world on your shoulders. Don't strain so hard. Don't take yourself so seriously. 2. Determine to like your work. Then it will become a pleasure, not drudgery. Perhaps you do not need to change your job. Change yourself and your work will seem different. 3. Plan your work, work your plan. Lack of system produces that I'm swamped feeling. 4. Don't try to do everything at once. That is why time is spread out. Heed that wise advice from the Bible, this one thing I do. 5. Get a correct mental attitude, remembering that ease or difficulty in your work depends upon how you think about it. Think it's hard and you make it hard. Think it's easy and it tends to become easy. 6. Become efficient in your work. Knowledge is power. It is always easier to do a thing right. 7. Practice being relaxed. Easy always does it. Don't press or tug. Take it in your stride. 8. Discipline yourself not to put off until tomorrow what you can do today. Accumulation of undone jobs makes your work harder. Keep your work up to schedule. 9. Pray about your work. You will get relaxed efficiency by so doing. 10. Take on the unseen partner. It is surprising the load he will take off you. God is as much at home in offices, factories, stores, kitchens, as in churches. He knows more about your job than you do. His help will make your work easy. Chapter 15. How to get people to like you. We might as well admit it, we want people to like us. You may hear someone say, I don't care whether people like me or not. But whenever you hear anyone say that, just put it down as a fact that he is not really telling the truth. The psychologist, William James, said one of the deepest drives of human nature is the desire to be appreciated. The longing to be liked, to be held in esteem, to be a sought-after person, is fundamental in us. A poll was taken among some high school students on the question, What do you most desire? By overwhelming majority, the students voted that they wanted to be popular. The same urge is in older people as well. Indeed, it is doubtful if anybody ever outlives the desire to be well thought of, to be highly regarded, or to have the affection of his associates. To be master of the art of popularity, be artless. Strive deliberately after popularity, and the chances are you will never attain it. But become one of those rare personalities about whom people say, he certainly has something, and you can be certain you are on the way to having people like you. I must warn you, however, that despite your attainments in popularity, you will never get everybody to like you. There is a curious quirk in human nature whereby some people just naturally won't like you. A quatrain inscribed on a wall at Oxford says, I do not love thee, Dr. Fell, the reason why I cannot tell, but this alone I know full well, I do not love thee, Dr. Fell. That verse is very subtle. The author did not like Dr. Fell. He didn't know why, but he just knew he didn't like him. It was most likely an unreasonable dislike, for undoubtedly Dr. Fell was a very nice person. Perhaps if the author had known him better he would have liked him, but poor Dr. Fell never did become popular with the author of those lines. It may have been due simply to a lack of rapprochement, that baffling mechanism by which we either do or do not click with certain people. Even the Bible recognizes this unhappy fact about human nature, for it says, if it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. The Bible is a very realistic book, and it knows people, their infinite possibilities as well as their imperfections. The Bible advised the disciples that if they went into a village and after trying their best to get along with people still couldn't do so, they were to shake off the very dust of the village from their feet, and whosoever will not receive you, when ye go out of that city, shake off the very dust from your feet for a testimony against them. This is all by way of saying that you will be wise if you do not let it too seriously affect you if you do not achieve perfect popularity with everyone. However, there are certain formulas and procedures which, if followed faithfully, can make you a person whom other people like. You can enjoy satisfactory personal relationships even if you are a difficult person or by nature shy and retiring, even unsocial. You can make of yourself one who enjoys easy, normal, natural, and pleasing relationships with others. I cannot urge you too strongly to consider the importance of this subject and to give time and attention to its mastery, for you will never be fully happy or successful until you do. Failure in this capacity will adversely affect you psychologically. To be liked is of profounder importance than mere ego satisfaction. As necessary as that is to your success in life, normal and satisfactory personal relations are even more important. The feeling of not being wanted or needed is one of the most devastating of all human reactions. To the degree to which you are sought after or needed by other people will you become a fully released person. The lone wolf, the isolated personality, the retiring individual, these people suffer a misery which is difficult to describe. In self-defense they retire ever further within themselves. Their ingrowing, introverted nature is denied the normal development which the outgoing, self-giving person experiences. Unless the personality is drawn out of itself and can be of value to someone, it may sicken and die. The feeling of not being wanted or needed produces frustration, aging, illness. If you have a feeling of uselessness, if nobody needs or wants you, you really ought to do something about it. It is not only a pathetic way to live but is serious psychologically. Those who deal with the problems of human nature constantly encounter this problem and its unfortunate results. For example, at a Rotary Club luncheon in a certain city, two physicians were at my table, one an elderly man who had been retired for several years, the other the most popular young doctor in town. The young doctor, looking frazzled, dashed in late and slumped down with a weary sigh. If only the telephone would stop ringing, he complained. I can't get anywhere because people call me all the time. I wish I could put a silencer on that telephone. The old doctor spoke up quietly. I know how you feel, Jim, he said. I used to feel that way myself, but be thankful the telephone does ring. Be glad people want and need you. Then he added pathetically, nobody ever calls me anymore. I would like to hear the telephone ring again. Nobody wants me and nobody needs me. I'm a has-been. All of us at the table who sometimes feel a bit worn by numerous activities did a lot of thinking as we listened to the old doctor. A middle-aged woman complained to me that she didn't feel well. She was dissatisfied and unhappy. My husband is dead, the children are grown, and there is no place for me anymore. People treat me kindly, but they are indifferent. Everyone has his own interest and nobody needs me, nobody wants me. I wonder, could that be a reason I do not feel well? She asked. Indeed, that could very likely be an important reason. In a business office, the founder of the firm just past 70 was walking restlessly and aimlessly around. He talked with me, while his son, present head of the business, whom I had come to see, was on the telephone. The older man said gloomily, why don't you write a book on how to retire? That is what I need to know. I thought it was going to be wonderful to give up the burdens of the job, he continued, but now I find that nobody is interested in anything I say. I used to think I was a popular fellow, But now when I come down here and sit around the office, everyone says hello, then they forget me. I might as well stay away altogether for all they care. My son is running the business and he is doing a good job of it, but, he concluded pathetically, I'd like to think they needed me a little bit. These people are suffering one of the most pathetic and unhappy experiences in this life. Their basic desire is to be sought after, and this desire is not being satisfied. They want people to appreciate them. The personality longs for esteem. But it isn't only in retirement that this situation develops. A girl of 21 told me that she had been unwanted ever since birth. Someone had given her the notion she was an unwanted child. This serious idea had sunk into her subconscious, giving her a profound sense of inferiority and self-depreciation. It made her shy and backward, causing her to retreat into herself. She became lonely and unhappy and was, in fact, an underdeveloped personality. The cure for her condition was to revamp her life spiritually, especially her thinking, which process in time made her a well-liked person by setting her personality free of herself. Countless other people, not particularly victims of deep, unconscious psychological conflicts, have never mastered the knack of being popular. They try hard enough. They even go to extremes, often acting in a manner they do not really enjoy, but which they employ only because of their intense desire to have people like them. Everywhere today we see people putting on an act because of their inordinate desire for popularity in the superficial sense in which the word is often used in modern society. The fact is that popularity can be attained by a few simple, natural, normal, and easily mastered techniques. Practice them diligently and you can become a well-liked person. First, become a comfortable person, that is, one with whom people can associate without a sense of strain. Of some persons it is said, you can never quite get next to him. There is always a barrier that you can't get over. A comfortable person is easygoing and natural. He has a pleasant, kindly, genial way about him. Being with him is not unlike wearing an old hat or an old pair of shoes or an easy old coat. A stiff, reserved, unresponsive individual never meshes into the group. He is always just a bit out of it. You never quite know how to take him or how he will react. You just aren't easy like with him. Some young people were talking about a 17-year-old boy whom they liked very much. Of him they said, he is good company. He is a good sport. He is easy to be with. It is very important to cultivate the quality of being natural. Usually that sort of individual is large-souled. Little people who are much concerned about how you treat them, who are jealous of their place or position, who meticulously stand on their prerogatives, are stiff and easily offended. A man who is an outstanding example of these truths is James A. Parley, former Postmaster General of the United States. I met Mr. Parley for the first time a number of years ago. Months later I met him in a large crowd of people and he called me by name. Being human, I never forgot that, and it is one reason I have always liked Mr. Parley. An interesting incident illustrates the secret of this man who is an expert in how to get people to like him. I was to speak in Philadelphia at a book and author luncheon along with Mr. Parley and 2 other authors. I did not actually witness the scene I am about to describe, as I was late in arriving, but my publisher did. The speakers at this luncheon were walking along the hotel corridor together when they passed a colored maid standing by a cart loaded with sheets, towels, and other equipment with which she was servicing the rooms. She was paying no attention to this group of people as they turned aside to avoid her cart. Mr. Parley walked up to her, put out his hand, and said, "Hello, there. How are you? I'm Jim Parley. What's your name? Glad to see you." My publisher looked back at her as the group passed down the hall. The girl's mouth was wide with astonishment and her face broke into a beautiful smile. It was an excellent example of how an unegotistical, comfortable, outgoing person is successful in personal relationships. A university psychology department conducted an analysis of the personality traits by which people are liked or disliked. 100 traits were scientifically analyzed and it was reported that one must have 46 favorable traits in order to be liked. It is rather discouraging to realize that you must have so large a number of characteristics to be popular. Christianity, however, teaches that one basic trait will go far toward getting people to like you. That trait is a sincere and forthright interest in and love for people. Perhaps if you cultivate this basic trait, other traits will naturally develop. If you are not the comfortable type of person, I suggest that you make study of your personality with a view toward eliminating conscious and unconscious elements of strain which may exist. Do not assume that the reason other people do not like you is because of something wrong with them. Assume, instead, that the trouble is within yourself and determine to find and eliminate it. This will require scrupulous honesty and it may also involve the assistance of personality experts. The so-called scratchy elements in your personality may be qualities which you have taken on through the years. Perhaps they have been assumed defensively, or they may be the result of attitudes developed in your younger days. Regardless of origin, they can be eliminated by a scientific study of yourself and by your recognition of the necessity for change followed by a process of personality rehabilitation. A man came to our clinic at the church seeking help in the problem of personal relationships. About 35 years of age, he was the type of person whom you would certainly look at twice if not 3 times. He was splendidly proportioned and impressive. Superficially regarding him, it was surprising that people should not like him. But he proceeded to outline an unhappy and continuous set of circumstances and instances to illustrate his dismal failure in human relations. "I do my best," he explained. "I have tried to put into practice the rules I have been taught about getting along with people, but get nowhere with the effort. People just don't like me, and what is more, I am aware of it." After talking with him, it was not difficult to understand the trouble. There was in his manner of speech a persistently critical attitude, thinly veiled but nonetheless apparent. He had an unattractive manner of pursing his lips which indicated a kind of primness or reproof for everybody, as if he felt just a bit superior and disdainful toward other people. In fact, there was about him a noticeable attitude of superiority. He was very rigid, with no flexibility of personality. "Isn't there some way to change myself so that people will like me?" he demanded. "Isn't there some way I can stop unconsciously rubbing people the wrong way?" The young man was decidedly self-centered and egotistical. The person he really liked was himself. Every statement, every attitude was unconsciously measured in terms of how it reacted on himself. We had to teach him to love other people and to forget himself, which was of course a complete reversal of his development. It was vital, however, to the solution of his problem. I found that this young man was irritable with people and he picked on them in his own mind, though no outward conflicts with other persons developed. Inwardly, he was trying to make everybody over to suit himself. Unconsciously, people realized this, though perhaps they did not define the trouble. Barriers were erected in their minds toward him. Since he was being unpleasant to people in his thoughts, it followed that he was less than warm in his personal attitudes. He was polite enough and managed not to be boorish and unpleasant, but people unconsciously felt coolness in him, so gave him the brush off of which he complained. The reason they did so was because in his mind he had brushed them off. He liked himself too well, and to build up his self-esteem he disliked others. He was suffering from self-love, a chief cure for which is the practice of love for others. He was bewildered and baffled when we outlined his difficulty, but he was sincere and meant business. He practiced the suggested techniques for developing love of others in place of self-love. It required some fundamental changes to accomplish this, but he succeeded in doing so. One method suggested was that at night before retiring he make a list of persons he had met during the day, as, for example, the bus driver or the newsboy. He was to picture mentally each person whose name appeared on the list, and as he brought each face up before him he was to think a kindly thought about that person. Then he was to pray for each one. He was to pray around his little world. Each of us has his own world, people with whom we do business or are associated in one way or another. For example, the first person outside the family whom this young man saw in the morning was the elevator man in his apartment house. He had not been in the habit of saying anything to him beyond a perfunctory and growled good morning. Now he took the time to have a little chat with the elevator man. He asked him about his family and about his interests. He found that the elevator operator had an interesting point of view and some experiences which were quite fascinating. He began to see new values in a person who to him previously had been a mechanical robot, who ran the elevator up and down to his floor. He actually began to like the elevator operator, and in turn the elevator man, who had formed a pretty accurate opinion of the young man, began to revise his views. They established a friendly relationship. So the process went from person to person. One day the young man said to me, "I have found that the world is filled with interesting people and I never realized it before." When he made that observation he proved that he was losing himself, and when he did that, as the Bible so wisely tells us, he found himself. In losing himself he found himself and lots of new friends besides. People learned to like him. Learning to pray for people was important in his rehabilitation, for when you pray for anyone you tend to modify your personal attitude toward him. You lift the relationship thereby to a higher level. The best in the other person begins to flow out toward you as your best flows toward him. In the meeting of the best in each a higher unity of understanding is established. Essentially, getting people to like you is merely the other side of liking them. One of the most popular men who lived in the United States within the lifetime of most of us was the late Will Rogers. One of the most characteristic statements he ever made was, "I never met a man I didn't like." That may have been a slight exaggeration, but I am sure Will Rogers did not regard it as such. That is the way he felt about people, and as a result people opened up to him like flowers to the sun. Sometimes the weak objection is offered that it is difficult to like some people. Granted, some people are by nature more likable than others. Nevertheless, a serious attempt to know any individual will reveal qualities within him that are admirable, even lovable. A man had the problem of conquering feelings of irritation toward persons with whom he was associated. For some people he had a very profound dislike. They irritated him intensely, but he conquered these feelings simply by making an exhaustive list of everything he could possibly admire about each person who annoyed him. Daily he attempted to add to this list. He was surprised to discover that people whom he thought he did not like at all proved to have many pleasing qualities. In fact, he was at a loss to understand how he ever disliked them after becoming conscious of their attractive qualities. Of course, while he was making these discoveries about them, they, in turn, were finding new and likable qualities in him. If you have gone through life up to this point without having established satisfactory human relationships, do not assume that you cannot change, but it will be necessary to take very definite steps towards solving the problem. You can change and become a popular person, well liked and esteemed, if you are willing to make the effort. May I remind you, as I remind myself, that one of the greatest tragedies of the average person is the tendency to spend our whole lives perfecting our faults. We develop a fault and we nurse it and cultivate it and never change it. Like a needle caught in the groove of a defective record on a gramophone, it plays the same old tune over and over again. You must lift the needle out of the groove, then you will have disharmony no longer, but harmony. Don't spend more of your life perfecting faults in human relations. Spend the rest of your life perfecting your great capacities for friendliness, for personal relations are vitally important to successful living. Still another important factor in getting people to like you is to practice building up the ego of other persons. The ego, being the essence of our personalities, is sacred to us. There is in every person a normal desire for a feeling of self-importance. If I deflate your ego and therefore your self-importance, though you may laugh it off, I have deeply wounded you. In fact, I have shown disrespect for you, and while you may exercise charity toward me, even so, unless you are finely developed spiritually, you are not going to like me very well. On the other hand, if I elevate your self-respect and contribute to your feeling of personal worth, I am showing high esteem for your ego. I have helped you to be your best self, and therefore you appreciate what I have done. You are grateful to me. You like me for it. The deflation of another person's ego may be mildly done perhaps, but one can never evaluate how deep the depreciation goes from even a remark or an attitude that is not meant to be unkind. Here is the way in which ego is often deflated. The next time you are in a group and someone tells a joke and everybody laughs with appreciation and pleasure except yourself, when the laughter has died down, say patronizingly, "Well, that is a pretty good joke, all right. I saw it in a magazine last month." Of course, it will make you feel quite important to let others know of your superior knowledge, but how does it make the man feel who told the joke? You have robbed him of the satisfaction of having told a good story. You have crowded him out of his brief moment in the limelight and usurped attention to yourself. In fact, you have taken the wind out of his sails and left him flat and deflated. He enjoyed his momentary little prominence, but you took it away from him. Nobody in that group is going to like you for what you did, and certainly not the man whose story you spoiled. Whether you like the joke or not, let the storyteller and the others enjoy it. Remember, he may be a little bit embarrassed and shy. It would have done him good to have received a response. Don't deflate people. Build them up and they will love you for it. While writing this chapter, I enjoyed a visit with an old and dear friend, Dr. John W. Hoffman, one-time president of Ohio Wesleyan University. As I sat with him in Pasadena, I realized once again how much this great personality has always meant to me. Many years ago, on the night before my graduation from college, we had a banquet at our fraternity house at which he was present and made a talk. After dinner, he asked me to walk with him to the president's house. It was a beautiful moonlit night in June. All the way up the hill, he talked to me about life and its opportunities and told me what a thrill awaited me as I entered the outside world. As we stood in front of his house, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Norman, I have always liked you. I believe in you. You have great possibilities. I shall always be proud of you. You have got it in you." Of course, he overestimated me, but that is infinitely better than to depreciate a person. It has been many years since then, but I never forgot what he said nor how he said it on that June night long ago. I have loved him all across the years. I discovered that he made similar statements to many other boys and girls long since become men and women, and they, too, love him because he respected their personalities and was constantly building them up. Through the years, he would write to me and to others congratulating us on some little thing that we had done, and a word of approval from him meant much. Little wonder this honored guide of youth has the affection and devotion of thousands of people whose lives he touched. Whomever you help to build up and become a better, stronger, finer person will give you his undying devotion. Build up as many people as you can. Do it unselfishly. Do it because you like them and because you see possibilities in them. Do this and you will never lack for friends. Do them good and their esteem and affection will flow back toward you. The basic principles of getting people to like you need no prolonged and labored emphasis, for they are very simple and easily illustrate their own truth. However, I list 10 practical rules for getting the esteem of others. The soundness of these principles has been demonstrated innumerable times. Practice them until you become expert at them and people will like you. 1. Learn to remember names. Inefficiency at this point may indicate that your interest is not sufficiently outgoing. A man's name is very important to him. Be homey. 3. Acquire the quality of relaxed easygoingness so that things do not ruffle you. 4. Don't be egotistical. Guard against giving the impression that you know it all. Be natural and normally humble. 5. Cultivate the quality of being interesting so that people will want to be with you and get something of stimulating value from their association with you. 6. Study to get the scratchy elements out of your personality, even those of which you may be unconscious. 7. Sincerely attempt to heal, on an honest Christian basis, every misunderstanding you have had or now have. Drain off your grievances. 8. Practice liking people until you learn to do so genuinely. Remember what Will Rogers said, "I never met a man I didn't like." Try to be that way. 9. Never miss an opportunity to say a word of congratulation upon anyone's achievement, or express sympathy in sorrow or disappointment. 10. Get a deep spiritual experience so that you have something to give people that will help them to be stronger and meet life more effectively. Give strength to people and they will give affection to you. Chapter 16. Prescription for Heartache. Please give me a prescription for heartache. This curious and rather pathetic request was made by a man who had been informed by his doctor that the feelings of disability of which he complained were not of a physical nature. His trouble lay in an inability to rise above sorrow. He was suffering from an ache in his personality as a result of grief. His doctor advised him to secure spiritual consultation and treatment. So, continuing to use the terminology of medicine, he repeated his question, "Is there a spiritual prescription which will reduce my constant inner suffering? I realize that sorrow comes to everyone and I should be able to meet it the same as others. I have tried my best but find no peace." Again he asked with a sad, slow smile, "Give me a prescription for heartache." There is indeed a prescription for heartache. One element in the prescription is physical activity. The sufferer must avoid the temptation to sit and brood. A sensible program which substitutes physical activity for such fruitless brooding reduces the strain on the area of the mind where we reflect, philosophize, and suffer mental pain. Muscular activity utilizes another part of the brain and therefore shifts the strain and gives relief. An old country lawyer who had a sound philosophy and much wisdom told a sorrowing woman that the best medicine for a broken heart is to take a scrubbing brush and get down on your knees and go to work. The best medicine for a man, he declared, is to get an axe and chop wood until physically tired. While this is not guaranteed to be a complete cure for heartache, yet it does tend to mitigate such suffering. Whatever the character of your heartache, one of the first steps is to resolve to escape from any defeatist situation which may have been created around yourself, even though it is difficult to do so, and return once again to the normal course of your life. Get back into the mainstream of life's activities. Take up your old associations. Get busy walking, riding, swimming, playing, get the blood to coursing through your system. Lose yourself in some worthwhile project. Fill your days with creative activity and emphasize the physical aspect of activity. Employ healthy mind-relieving busyness, but be sure that it is of a worthwhile and constructive nature. Superficial escapism through feverish activity merely deadens pain temporarily and does not heal, as, for example, parties and drinking. An excellent and normal release from heartache is to give way to grief. There is a foolish point of view current today that one should not show grief, that it is not proper to cry or express oneself through the natural mechanism of tears and sobbing. This is a denial of the law of nature. It is natural to cry when pain or sorrow comes. It is a relief mechanism provided in the body by Almighty God and should be used. To restrain grief, to inhibit it, to bottle it up, is to fail to use one of God's means for eliminating the pressure of sorrow. Like every other function of the human body and nervous system, this must be controlled, but it should not be denied altogether. A good cry by either man or woman is a release from heartache. I should warn, however, that this mechanism should not be used unduly nor allowed to become a habitual process. Should that happen, it partakes of the nature of abnormal grief and could become a psychosis. Unrestraint of any kind should not be allowed. I receive many letters from people whose loved ones have died. They tell me that it is very difficult for them to go to the same places they were in the habit of frequenting together or to be with the same people with whom they associated as a couple or as a family. Therefore they avoid the old-time places and friends. I regard this as a serious mistake. A secret of curing heartache is to be as normal and natural as possible. This does not imply disloyalty or indifference. This policy is important in avoiding a state of abnormal grief. Normal sorrow is a natural process and its normality is evidenced by the ability of the individual to return to his usual pursuits and responsibilities and continue therein as formerly. Inevitably, the basic prescription for heartache is to turn to God in an attitude of faith and empty the mind and heart to Him. Perseverance in the act of spiritual self-emptying will finally bring healing to the broken heart. This generation, which has suffered fully as much if not more heartache than people in preceding eras, needs to relearn that which the wisest men of all time have known, namely, that there is no healing of the pain suffered by humanity except through the benign ministrations of faith. One of the greatest souls of the ages was Brother Lawrence, who said, "If in this life we would know the serene peace of paradise, we must school ourselves in familiar, humble, and loving converse with God." It is not advisable to attempt to carry the burden of sorrow and mental pain without divine help, for its weight is more than the personality can bear. The simplest and most effective of all prescriptions for heartache then is to practice the presence of God. This will soothe the ache in your heart and ultimately heal the wound. Men and women who have experienced great tragedy tell us that this prescription is effective. Another profoundly curative element in the prescription for heartache is to gain a sound and satisfying philosophy of life and death and deathlessness. For my part, when I gain the unshakable belief that there is no death, that all life is indivisible, that the here and hereafter are one, that time and eternity are inseparable, that this is one unobstructed universe, then I found the most satisfying and convincing philosophy of my entire life. These convictions are based upon sound foundations, the Bible for one. I believe that the Bible gives us a very subtle, and as will be proved ultimately, a scientific series of insights into the great question, what happens when a man leaves this world? Also, the Bible very wisely tells us that we know these truths by faith. You come to some glorious moment where you simply know, that is the way it happened to me. I arrived at this positive faith gradually, yet there came one moment when I knew. But it will lift and dissipate grief. It will fill your mind with a deep understanding of the meaning of this inevitable circumstance, and it will give you a deep assurance that you have not lost your loved one. Live on this faith and you will be at peace and the ache will leave your heart. Take into your mind and heart one of the most marvelous texts in the Holy Bible. Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man, the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. This means that you have never seen, no matter what you have seen, however wonderful it is, you have never seen anything to compare with the marvelous things that God has prepared for those who love him and who put their trust in him. Moreover, it says that you have never heard anything to compare with the astonishing marvels that God has laid up for those who follow his teachings and live according to his Spirit. Not only have you never seen nor ever heard, but you have never even dimly imagined what he is going to do for you. This sentence goes all out in promising comfort and immortality and reunion and every good thing to those who center their lives in God. After many years of reading the Bible and being intimately connected with all the phases of the lives of hundreds of people, I wish to state unequivocally that I have found this biblical promise to be absolutely true. It applies even to this world. This passage also relates to the state of existence of those now living on the other side and our relationship, while we live, to those who have preceded us across that barrier which we call death. I use the word barrier somewhat apologetically. We have always thought of death as a barrier with a concept of a separatist nature. In effect, we are on the edge of one of the greatest scientific discoveries in history which will substantiate, on a laboratory exploratory basis, the existence of the soul and its deathlessness. For many years I have been accumulating a series of incidents, the validity of which I accept and which bear out the conviction that we live in a dynamic universe where life, not death, is the basic principle. I have confidence in the people who have described the following experiences and am convinced that they indicate a world impinged upon or intertwined with our own through the meshes of which human spirits, on both sides of death, live in unbroken fellowship. The conditions of life on the other side, as we know them in mortality, are modified. Undoubtedly, those who have crossed to the other side dwell in a higher medium than we do, and their understanding is amplified beyond ours. Yet all the facts point to the continued existence of our loved ones and the further fact that they are not far away, and still another fact implied, but no less real, that we shall be reunited with them. Meanwhile, we continue in fellowship with those who dwell in the spirit world. William James, one of America's greatest scholars, after a lifetime of study said he was satisfied that the human brain is only a medium for the soul's existence and that the mind as now constituted will be exchanged at last for a brain that will allow the owner to reach out into untapped areas of understanding. As our spiritual being is amplified here on earth and as we grow in age and experience, we become more conscious of this vaster world all around us, and when we die it is only to enter into an enlarged capacity. Euripides, one of the greatest thinkers of antiquity, was convinced that the next life would be of infinitely greater magnitude. Socrates shared the same concept. One of the most comforting statements ever made was his remark, "No evil can befall a good man in this life or in the next." Natalie Kalmus, scientific expert in Technicolor, tells about the death of her sister. The following account given by this scientifically trained woman appeared in the Inspirational magazine guideposts. Natalie Kalmus quotes her dying sister as saying, "Natalie, promise me that you won't let them give me any drugs. I realize that they are trying to help relieve my pain, but I want to be fully aware of every sensation. I am convinced that death will be a beautiful experience. I promised." Alone, later, I wept, thinking of her courage. Then as I tossed in bed on through the night, I realized that what I thought to be a calamity my sister intended to be a triumph. 10 days later the final hour drew near. I had been at her bedside for hours. We had talked about many things, and always I marveled at her quiet, sincere confidence in eternal life. Not once did the physical torture overcome her spiritual strength. This was something that the doctors simply hadn't taken into account. "Dear kind God, keep my mind clear and give me peace," she had murmured over and over again during those last days. We had talked so long that I noticed she was drifting off to sleep. I left her quietly with the nurse and retired to get some rest. A few minutes later I heard my sister's voice calling for me. She was dying. I sat on her bed and took her hand. It was on fire. Then she seemed to rise up in bed almost to a sitting position. "Natalie," she said, "there are so many of them. There's Fred. And Ruth ... What's she doing here?" "Oh, I know." An electric shock went through me. She had said Ruth. Ruth was her cousin who had died suddenly the week before. But Eleanor had not been told of Ruth's sudden death. Chill after chill shot up and down my spine. I felt on the verge of some powerful, almost frightening knowledge. She had murmured Ruth's name. Her voice was surprisingly clear. "It's so confusing. So many of them." Suddenly her arms stretched out as happily as when she had welcomed me. "I'm going up," she said. Then she dropped her arms around my neck and relaxed in my arms. The will of her spirit had turned final agony into rapture. As I laid her head back on the pillow, there was a warm, peaceful smile on her face. Her golden brown hair lay carelessly on the pillow. I took a white flower from the vase and placed it in her hair. With her petite, trim figure, her wavy hair, the white flower, and the soft smile, she looked once more and permanently just like a schoolgirl. The mention of her cousin Ruth by the dying girl and the evident fact that she saw her clearly is a phenomenon that recurs again and again in the incidents which have come to my attention. So repetitive is this phenomenon and so similar are the characteristics of this experience as described by many that it amounts to a substantial evidence that the people whose names are called, whose faces are seen, are actually present. Where are they? What is their condition? What sort of body have they? These are questions that are difficult. The idea of a different dimension is probably the most tenable, or it may be more accurate to believe that they live in a different frequency cycle. It is impossible to see through the blades of an electric fan when it is in a stationary position. At high speed, however, the blades appear to be transparent. In the higher frequency or the state in which our loved ones dwell, the impenetrable qualities of the universe may open to the gaze of one passing into the mysteries. In deep moments of our own lives it is entirely possible that we enter to a degree at least into that higher frequency. In one of the most beautiful lines in English literature, Robert Ingersoll suggests this great truth: in the night of death, hope sees a star and listening love can hear the rustle of a wing. A famous neurologist tells of a man who was at death's door. The dying man looked up at the physician sitting beside his bed and began to call off names which the physician wrote down. The doctor was personally unfamiliar with any name mentioned. Later the physician asked the man's daughter, "Who are these people? Your father spoke of them as if he saw them." "They are all relatives," she said, "who have been dead a long time." The physician said he believes his patient did see them. "Friends of mine, Mr. and Mrs. William Sage, lived in New Jersey and I was often in their home. Mr. Sage, whom his wife called Will, died first. A few years later, when Mrs. Sage was on her deathbed, the most surprised look passed across her face, and it lighted up in a wonderful smile as she said, 'Why, it is Will.' That she saw him those about her bed had no doubt whatsoever." Arthur Godfrey, famous radio personality, tells of being asleep in his bunk on a destroyer in World War I. Suddenly his father stood beside him. He put out his hand, smiled, and said, "So long, son," and Godfrey answered, "So long, Dad." Later he was awakened and given a cablegram telling him of the death of his father. The time of his passing was given, and it was the precise period during which Godfrey in his sleep saw his father. Mary Margaret McBride, also a famous radio personality, was overwhelmed with grief upon the death of her mother. They had been very close to each other. She awakened one night and sat on the edge of her bed. Suddenly she had the feeling, to use her own words, that Mama was with me. She did not see her mother nor hear her speak, but from that time on, I knew that my mother isn't dead, that she is nearby. The late Rufus Jones, one of the most famous spiritual leaders of our time, tells about his son Lowell, who died at 12 years of age. He was the apple of his father's eye. The boy took sick when Dr. Jones was on the ocean bound for Europe. The night before entering Liverpool, while lying in his bunk, he experienced an indefinable, inexplainable feeling of sadness. Then he said that he seemed to be enveloped in the arms of God. A great feeling of peace and a sense of a profound possession of his son came to him. Upon landing in Liverpool, he was advised that his son had died, his death occurring at the precise hour when Dr. Jones had felt a sense of God's presence and the everlasting nearness of his son. A member of my church, Mrs. Bryson Colt, tells of an aunt whose husband and 3 children were burned to death when their house was destroyed by fire. The aunt was badly burned but lived for 3 years. When finally she lay dying, a radiance suddenly came over her face. "It is all so beautiful," she said. "They are coming to meet me. Fluff up my pillows and let me go to sleep." Mr. H.B. Clark, an old friend of mine, was for many years a construction engineer, his work taking him into all parts of the world. He was of a scientific turn of mind, a quite restrained, factual, unemotional type of man. I was called one night by his physician, who said that he did not expect him to live but a few hours. His heart action was slow and the blood pressure was extraordinarily low. There was no reflex action at all. The doctor gave no hope. I began to pray for him, as did others. The next day his eyes opened and after a few days he recovered his speech. His heart action and blood pressure returned to normal. After he recovered strength, he said, "At some time during my illness something very peculiar happened to me. I cannot explain it. It seemed that I was a long distance away. I was in the most beautiful and attractive place I have ever seen. There were lights all about me, beautiful lights. I saw faces dimly revealed, kind faces they were, and I felt very peaceful and happy. In fact, I have never felt happier in my life. Then the thought came to me, I must be dying. Then it occurred to me, perhaps I have died. Then I almost laughed out loud and asked myself, why have I been afraid of death all my life? There is nothing to be afraid of in this. How did you feel about it? I asked. Did you want to come back to life? Did you want to live, for you are not dead, although the doctor felt that you were very close to death? Did you want to live? He smiled and said, it did not make the slightest difference. If anything, I think I would have preferred to stay in that beautiful place. Hallucination, a dream, a vision, I do not believe so. I have spent too many years talking to people who have come to the edge of something and had a look across, who unanimously have reported beauty, light, and peace, to have any doubt in my own mind. The New Testament teaches the indestructibility of life in a most interesting and simple manner. It describes Jesus after his crucifixion and a series of appearances, disappearances, and reappearances. Some saw him and then he vanished out of their sight. Then others saw him and again he vanished. It is as if to say, you see me and then you do not see me. This indicates that he is trying to tell us that when we do not see him, it does not mean he is not there. Out of sight does not mean out of life. Occasional mystical appearances which some experience indicate the same truth, that he is nearby. Did he not say, because I live, ye shall live also? In other words, our loved ones who have died in this faith are also nearby and occasionally draw near to comfort us. A boy serving in Korea wrote to his mother, saying, the strangest things happen to me. Once in a while at night, when I am afraid, Daddy seems to be with me. Daddy had been dead for 10 years. Then the boy wistfully asks his mother, do you think that Daddy can actually be with me here on these Korean battlefields? The answer is, why not? How can we be citizens of a scientific generation and not believe that this could be true? Again and again proofs are offered that this is a dynamic universe surcharged with mystic, electric, electronic, atomic forces, and all are so wonderful that we have never yet comprehended them. This universe is a great spiritual sounding house, alive and vital. Albert E. Cliff, well-known Canadian writer, tells of the death of his father. The dying man had sunk into a coma and it was thought he was gone. Then a momentary resurgence of life occurred. His eyes flickered open. On the wall was one of those old-time mottos which said, I know that my Redeemer life. The dying man opened his eyes, looked at that motto, and said, I do know that my Redeemer life, for they are all here around me, mother, father, brothers, and sisters. Long gone from this earth were they all, but evidently he saw them. Who is to gainsay? The late Mrs. Thomas Edison told me that when her famous husband was dying he whispered to his physician, it is beautiful over there. Edison was the world's greatest scientist. All his life he had worked with phenomena. He was of a factual cast of mind. He never reported anything as a fact until he saw it work. He would never have reported, "It is very beautiful over there," unless, having seen, he knew it to be true. Many years ago a missionary went to the South Sea Islands to work among a cannibal tribe. After many months he converted the chief to Christianity. One day this old chief said to the missionary, "Remember the time you first came among us?" "Indeed I do," replied the missionary. "As I went through the forest I became aware of hostile forces all around me." "They did indeed surround you," said the chief, "for we were following you to kill you, but something prevented us from doing it." "And what was that?" asked the missionary. "Now that we are friends, tell me," coaxed the chief, "who are those two shining ones walking on either side of you?" "My friend, Jeffrey O'Hara, famous songwriter, author of the popular World War I song, Katie, also There Is No Death, Give a Man a Horse He Can Ride, and other songs, tells of a colonel in World War I whose regiment was wiped out in a bloody engagement. As he paced up and down the trench he says he could feel their hands and sense their presence. He said to Jeffrey O'Hara, 'I tell you, there is no death.' Mr. O'Hara wrote one of his greatest songs using that title, There Is No Death. Of these deep and tender matters I personally have no doubt whatsoever. I firmly believe in the continuation of life after that which we call death takes place. I believe there are two sides to the phenomenon known as death, this side where we now live and the other side where we shall continue to live. Eternity does not start with death. We are in eternity now. We are citizens of eternity. We merely change the form of the experience called life, and that change, I am persuaded, is for the better. My mother was a great soul, and her influence on me will ever stand out in my life as an experience that cannot be surpassed. She was a wonderful conversationalist. Her mind was keen and alert. She traveled the world over and enjoyed wide contacts as a Christian leader in missionary causes. Her life was full and rich. She had a marvelous sense of humor. She was good company, and I always loved to be with her. She was considered by all who knew her an unusually fascinating and stimulating personality. During my adult years, whenever I had the opportunity, I would go home to see her. I always anticipated the arrival at the family home, for it was an exciting experience in which everyone talked at once as we sat around the breakfast table. What happy reunions, what glorious meetings! Then came her death, and we tenderly laid her body in the beautiful little cemetery at Lynchburg in southern Ohio, a town where she had lived as a girl. I was very sad the day we left her there, and went away heavy-hearted. It was in the fullness of summertime when we took her home to her last resting place. It came autumn, and I felt that I wanted to be with my mother again. I was lonely without her, therefore I decided to go to Lynchburg. All night long on the train I thought sadly of the happy days now gone and how things were utterly changed and would never be the same again. So I came to the little town. The weather was cold and the sky overcast as I walked to the cemetery. I pushed through the old iron gates and my feet rustled in the leaves as I walked to her grave where I sat sad and lonely. Of a sudden the clouds parted and the sun came through. It lighted up the Ohio hills in gorgeous autumn colors, the hills where I grew up as a boy, which I have always loved so well, where she herself had played as a girl in the long ago. Then all of a sudden I seemed to hear her voice. Now I didn't actually hear her voice, but I seemed to. I am sure I heard it by the inward ear. The message was clear and distinct. It was stated in her beloved old-time tone, and this is what she said, "Why seek ye the living among the dead? I am not here. Do you think that I would stay in this dark and dismal place? I am with you and my loved ones always." In a burst of inner light I became wondrously happy. I knew that what I had heard was the truth. The message came to me with all the force of actuality. I could have shouted, and I stood up and put my hand on the tombstone and saw it for what it is, only a place where mortal remains lay. The body was there, to be sure, but it was only a coat that had been laid off because the wearer needed it no longer. But she, that gloriously lovely spirit, she was not there. I walked out of that place and only rarely since have I returned. I like to go back there and think of her in the old days of my youth, but no longer is it a place of gloom. It is merely a symbol, for she is not there. She is with us, her loved ones. Why seek you the living among the dead? Luke 24:5. Read and believe the Bible as it tells about the goodness of God and the immortality of the soul. Pray sincerely and with faith. Make prayer and faith the habit of your life. Learn to have real fellowship with God and with Jesus Christ. As you do this, you will find a deep conviction welling up in your mind that these wonderful things are true indeed. If it were not so, I would have told you. You can depend upon the reliability of Christ. He would not let you believe and hold convictions so sacred in nature unless they are absolutely true. So in this faith, which is a sound, substantial, and rational view of life and eternity, you have the prescription for heartache. Chapter 17. How to draw upon that higher power. 4 men were sitting in the locker room of a country club after a game. Talk about golf scores drifted into a discussion of personal difficulties and problems. One man was especially despondent. The others, his friends, realizing his unhappy state of mind, had arranged this game to get his mind off his difficult situation. They hoped a few hours on the golf course might afford him some relief. Now, as they sat around after the game, various suggestions were offered him. Finally, one of the men arose to go. He knew about difficulties, for he'd had plenty himself, but he had found some vital answers to his problems. He stood hesitantly, then laid his hand on his friend's shoulder. "George," he said, "I hope you won't think I am preaching at you. Really, I'm not, but I would like to suggest something. It's the way I got through my difficulties. It really works if you work at it, and it's this. Why not draw upon that higher power?" He slapped his friend affectionately on the back and left the group. The other men sat mulling this over. Finally, the discouraged man said slowly, "I know what he means and I know where the higher power is. I only wish I knew how to draw upon it. It's what I need all right." Well, in due course he discovered how to draw upon that higher power, and it changed everything for him. Now he is a healthy, happy man. The advice given at the golf club is really very wise. There are many people today who are unhappy and depressed and just not getting anywhere with themselves or with conditions. And they do not need to be that way. Really, they don't. The secret is to draw upon that higher power. And how is that done? Let me tell you about a personal experience. When quite young, I was called to a large church in a university community, and many of my congregation were professors in the university as well as leading citizens of the city. I wanted to justify the confidence of those who gave me such an outstanding opportunity and accordingly worked very hard. As a result, I began to experience overstrain. Everyone should work hard, but there is no virtue in overtrying or overpressing to such an extent that you do not work efficiently. It is somewhat like making a golf shot. Try to kill the ball and you execute the shot poorly. You can do likewise in your job. I began to get rather tired and nervous and had no feeling of normal power. One day I decided to call on one of the professors, the late Hugh M. Tilrow, a great friend of mine. He was a wonderful teacher, and he was also a great fisherman and hunter. He was a man's man, an outdoor personality. I knew that if I did not find him at the university, he would be out on the lake fishing. And sure enough, there he was. He came ashore at my hail. "The fish are biting, come on," he said. I climbed in his boat and we fished a while. "What's the matter, son?" he asked with understanding. I told him how hard I was trying and that it was getting me down nervously. "I have no feeling of lift or power," I said. He chuckled. "Maybe you're trying too hard." As the boat scraped the shore, he said, "Come in the house with me." As we entered his cabin, he ordered, "Lie down there on that couch. I want to read you something. Shut your eyes and relax while I find the quotation." I did as directed, and thought he was going to read me some philosophical or perhaps diverting piece, but instead he said, "Here it is. Listen quietly while I read it to you, and let these words sink in. Hast thou not known, hast thou not heard, that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary. There is no searching of his understanding. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increaseth strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run, and not be weary, and they shall walk, and not faint." Then he asked, "Do you know from what I am reading?" "Yes, the 40th chapter of Isaiah," I answered. "I'm glad you know your Bible," he commented. "Why don't you practice it? Now relax. Take 3 deep breaths in and out slowly. Practice resting yourself in God. Practice depending upon Him for His support and power. Believe He is giving it to you now and don't get out of touch with that power. Yield yourself to it, let it flow through you. Give your job all you've got. Of course you must do that, but do it in a relaxed and easy manner like a batter in a big league ball game. He swings the bat easy-like and doesn't try to knock the ball out of the park. He just does the best he can and believes in himself because he knows that he has lots of reserve power." Then he repeated the passage again. "They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength." That was a long time ago, but I never forgot that lesson. He taught me how to draw upon that higher power, and believe me, his suggestions worked. I continue to follow my friend's advice, and it has never failed me in the more than 20 years that have passed since then. My life is crowded with activity, but that power formula gives me all the strength I need. A second method for drawing upon that higher power is to learn to take a positive, optimistic attitude toward every problem. In direct proportion to the intensity of the faith which you muster will you receive power to meet your situations. According to your faith be it unto you is a basic law of successful living. There is a higher power, and that power can do everything for you. Draw upon it and experience its great helpfulness. Why be defeated when you are free to draw upon that higher power? State your problem. Ask for a specific answer. Believe that you are getting that answer. Believe that now, through God's help, you are gaining power over your difficulty. A man and his wife who were in real trouble came to see me. This gentleman, a former magazine editor, was a distinguished figure in music and artistic circles. Everyone liked him for his geniality and friendliness. His wife was held in similar high regard. She was in poor health, and as a result they had retired to the country where they were living in semi-seclusion. This man told me he had experienced 2 heart attacks, one quite severe. His wife was in a steady decline and he was deeply concerned about her. The question he put was this: can I get hold of some power that can help us recover ourselves physically and give us new hope and courage and strength? The situation as he described it was a series of discouragements and defeats. Frankly, I felt that he was a bit too sophisticated to permit himself to adopt and utilize the simple trust that would be necessary if faith were to rehabilitate him. I told him I rather doubted he had the capacity to practice simple faith enough to open the sources of power according to the techniques of Christianity. But he assured me he was in earnest and was open-minded and would follow any directions given. I saw his honesty and the real quality of his soul and have had a great affection for him ever since. I gave him a simple prescription. He was to read the New Testament and the Psalms until his mind was saturated with them. I gave him the usual suggestion of committing passages to memory. Principally, I urged him to utilize the formula of putting his life in the hands of God, at the same time believing that God was filling him with power, and his wife also, and that the two of them were to believe unfalteringly that they were being guided in even the most commonplace details of their lives. They were also to believe that in cooperation with their physician, whom I happen to know and admire, that the healing grace of Jesus Christ was being given them. I suggested that they picture the healing power of the great physician as already working within them. Seldom have I seen two people who became more gloriously childlike in their faith and whose trust was more complete. They became enthusiastic about the Bible and would often telephone me about some wonderful passage they had just found. They gave me fresh insights into the truths of the Bible. It was a truly creative process working with this man and his wife. The next spring, Helen said, "I have never experienced a more wonderful springtime. The flowers this year are the loveliest I have ever seen. And have you noticed the sky with its extraordinary cloud formations and the delicate colors at dawn and sunset? The leaves seem greener this year, and I have never heard the birds sing with such ecstasy and melody." When she said this, there was an ecstatic light on her face, and I knew she had been reborn in the spirit. And she began to improve physically, regaining a large share of her old-time strength. Her native creative power began to flow forth once again, and life took on new meaning. As for Horace, there has been no more heart trouble, and physical, mental, and spiritual vigor mark him as extraordinarily vital. They have moved into a new community and have become a center of its life. Wherever they go, they touch people with a strange uplifting force. What is the secret which they discovered? Simply that they learned to draw upon that higher power. This higher power is one of the most amazing facts in human existence. I am awestruck, no matter how many times I have seen the phenomenon, by the thoroughgoing, tremendous, overwhelming changes for good that it accomplishes in the lives of people. Personally, I am so enthusiastic about all that the higher power can do for people that I am loath to bring this book to a close. I could recite story after story, incident after incident of those who by laying hold of this power have had a new birth of life. This power is constantly available. If you open to it, it will rush in like a mighty tide. It is there for anybody under any circumstances or in any condition. This tremendous inflow of power is of such force that in its inrush it drives everything before it, casting out fear, hate, sickness, weakness, moral defeat, scattering them as though they had never touched you, refreshing and re-strengthening your life with health, happiness, and goodness. For many years I have been interested in the problem of the alcoholic and in the organization known as Alcoholics Anonymous. One of their basic principles is that before a person can be helped he must recognize that he is an alcoholic and that of himself he can do nothing, that he has no power within himself, that he is defeated. When he accepts this point of view, he is in a position to receive help from other alcoholics and from the higher power, God. Another principle is the willingness to depend upon the higher power from whom he derives a strength which he does not himself possess. The working of this power in men's lives is the most moving and thrilling fact in this world. No other manifestation of power of any kind is equal to it. Materialistic power achievement is a romantic story. Men discover laws and formulas and harness power to do remarkable things. Spiritual power also follows laws. Mastery of these laws works wonders in an area more complicated than any form of mechanics, namely human nature. It is one thing to make a machine work right. To make human nature work right is something else. It requires greater skill, but it can be done. I sat one day under swaying palm trees in Florida listening to the story of a demonstration of higher power activity in the life of a man who narrowly escaped tragedy. He told me that he started drinking at the age of 16 as it was the so-called smart thing to do. After 23 years, beginning as a social drinker, he came to the end of the road on April 24, 1947. A growing hatred and bitterness toward his wife who had deserted him and toward his mother-in-law and sister-in-law culminated in his decision to kill these three women. I relate the story as he told it to me in his own language. To strengthen myself for this gory task, I went into a bar. A few more drinks would give me the courage to commit this triple murder. As I entered the bar, I saw a young man by the name of Carl drinking coffee. Although I had hated Carl from boyhood, I was utterly astounded to note his immaculate appearance. And I was also astonished to see him drinking coffee in a bar where he had spent on an average of $400 a month for drinks alone. Also, I was mystified by what seemed a strange light on his face. Being fascinated by his appearance, I approached Carl and asked, "What happened to you that you are drinking coffee?" "I have not had a drink for a year," Carl replied. I was utterly amazed, because Carl and I had been on many drinking bouts together. A strange incident in this affair is that even though I hated Carl, I was strangely moved. I could not help but listen when he asked, "Ed, did you ever want to quit drinking?" "Yes, I have quit 1,000 times," I replied. Carl smiled and said, "If you really want to do something about your problem, get sober and attend a meeting at the Presbyterian Church at 9 on Saturday. It is a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous." I told him I had no interest in religion, but that maybe I would come. I was unimpressed, but still I could not get that light in his eyes out of my mind. Carl did not insist that I attend the meeting, but repeated that if I wanted to do something for myself, he and his associates had an answer to my problem. After making that statement, Carl left and I stood up to the bar to order a drink, but somehow it had lost its appeal. So, instead, I went home, the only home I had remaining, my mother's home. May I explain that I had been married for 17 years to a very fine girl, but being an impatient person and having no faith in me due to my drinking, she finally decided upon getting a divorce, so not only my job and all my material assets but my home also were completely lost. Upon getting to my mother's home, I wrestled with a bottle until 6 a.m., but still could not take the drink. I kept thinking of Carl's appearance. So on Saturday morning I went to Carl and asked him what I could do to keep from taking a drink until 9 o'clock that night when the meeting would be held. Carl said, "Every time you come to a bar or whiskey sign or beer garden, just say one little prayer, 'Please, God, get me past this place,'" and then he added, "Run like hell. That will be cooperating with God. He will hear your prayer and the running will be your part." I did exactly as Carl told me to do. For many hours, anxious and shaky, accompanied by my sister, I walked around the streets of the town. Finally, at 8 o'clock, my sister said, "Ed, there are 7 drinking joints between here and the place where you are to attend the meeting. You go by yourself, and if you don't make it and come home drunk, we will still love you and hope for the best, but somehow I feel that this meeting will be different than any you ever attended." With God's help, I got by those 7 places. At the church entrance, I happened to look around and the sign over one of my favorite drinking places glared me straight in the eyes. The battle to decide whether to go into that bar or into the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting is one I shall never forget, but a power greater than myself pulled me to the meeting. Upon entering the meeting room, I was utterly astounded to receive the firm handshake of my ex-hated friend, Carl. My resentment toward him was disappearing. A round of introductions began to many men in all walks of life: doctors, lawyers, bricklayers, millwrights, coal miners, construction workers, plasterers, laborers. All types were there. I had been drinking with some of these men for the last 10 to 25 years, and here they were all sober on a Saturday night, and, above all, they were happy. What happened at that meeting is rather vague. All I know is that a rebirth had taken place. I felt different deep within. Happily leaving the meeting room at midnight, I went home with a glorious airlifting feeling and slept peaceably for the first time in more than 5 years. Upon awakening the next morning, I recall something clearly saying to me, "There is a power greater than yourself. If you will turn your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand Him, He will give you strength." It was Sunday morning, and I decided to go to church. I attended a service where the preacher was a man whom I had hated from childhood. The author wishes to comment at this point how inevitably hate is associated with emotional and spiritual sickness. When the mind is emptied of hate, a long step has been taken toward recovery. Love is a tremendous curative force. This preacher was one of those sedate, swallow-tailed coat-wearing Presbyterian ministers. I had no use for him, but that was my fault. He was all right, really. I sat nervously through the singing and the collection taking. Then the preacher read his scripture, and his sermon was based upon the theme, "Never belittle anyone's experience." He had it. I shall never forget that sermon as long as I live. It taught me a valuable lesson, never to belittle an experience because someone had it, for He and God know the depth and sincerity of that experience. Later I came to love this minister as one of the greatest, most sincere men I have ever known. Just where my new life began is a matter that is difficult to determine. Whether it was when I met Carl in the bar, or wrestling past the drinking places, or at the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, or at the church, I do not know. But I, who had been a hopeless alcoholic for 25 years, suddenly became a sober man. I could never have done this alone, for I had tried it 1,000 times and failed. But I drew upon a higher power, and the higher power, which is God, did it. I have known the narrator of the foregoing story for several years. Since becoming dry, he has had to face some difficult financial and other problems, but never once has he weakened. In talking with him, I find myself strangely moved. It isn't what he says or even the way he says it, but one is conscious of a power emanating from this man. He is not a famous person. He is an everyday, hard-working salesman, but the higher power is in him, flowing through him, operating within his experience, and it transmits itself to others. It transmitted itself to me. This chapter is not intended as a dissertation on alcoholism, although I will use still another reference in connection with this problem. I cite these experiences to show conclusively that if there is a power able to deliver a person from alcoholism, this same power can help any other person to overcome any other form of defeat he may face. There is nothing more difficult to overcome than the problem of alcoholism. The power that can accomplish that difficult feat can, I assure you, help you to overcome your difficulties whatever they may be. Let me give still another experience. I narrate this incident for the same purpose, namely, to emphasize that there is a power which can be applied, drawn upon, and used that mysteriously but surely gives to people who demonstrate faith the most remarkable victories. In the Hotel Roanoke at Roanoke, Virginia, one night a man who has since become a good friend told me the following story. 2 years before he had read my book, A Guide to Confident Living. At that time he was considered by himself and by others to be an utterly hopeless alcoholic. He is a businessman in a Virginia town and is of such ability that despite his drinking problem he was able to keep going with fair success. He had absolutely no control over his drinking, however, and evident deterioration was taking place. Upon reading the book above mentioned, the idea was lodged in his mind that if he could only get to New York he could be cured of his difficulty. He came to New York but was dead drunk when he arrived. A friend took him to a hotel and left him. He recovered sufficient consciousness to call a bellboy and told him that he wanted to go to the town's hospital, a famous institution for alcoholics, presided over by the late Dr. Silkworth, one of the greatest men in the field of alcoholism, now deceased but never to be forgotten. After robbing him of $100 or more which he had in his pocket, the bellboy delivered him to the hospital. After several days of treatment, Dr. Silkworth came in to see him and said, "Charles, I think we have done for you all that we can do. I have a feeling that you are well." This was not Dr. Silkworth's usual practice, and the fact that he handled this case in this manner causes one to sense the guiding hand of a higher power. Still somewhat shaky, Charles made his way downtown until he found himself outside the office door of the Marble Collegiate Church, 1 West 29th Street, New York City. It happened to be a legal holiday and the church was closed. He stood there hesitantly. He had hoped that he might go into the church and pray. Not being able to gain entrance, he did a strange thing. He took from his wallet one of his business cards and dropped it through the mail slot in the door. The instant he did that, a tremendous wave of peace came over him. He had an amazing sense of release. He put his head against the door and sobbed like a baby. But he knew that he was free, that some tremendous change had happened to him, the validity of which is attested by the fact that from that minute on there has been no turning back. He has lived in complete sobriety from that moment. There are several features about this incident which mark it as impressive. For one, Dr. Silkworth seemed to have released him from the hospital at the proper psychological, spiritual, and shall we say supernatural moment, indicating that the doctor himself was the subject of divine guidance. When Charles told me this story in the Hotel Roanoke 2 years after it happened, I had a feeling as he related it that I had heard it before in precise detail. But he had never told me this story. In fact, I had never previously talked to him. It occurred to me that perhaps he had written the story to me and I had read it, but he said he had never written me. I then asked him if he had told the story to one of my secretaries, associates, or any other person who could have related it to me, but he said he had never told the story to any other individual save his wife, and I had not met her until that night. Apparently this incident had been transmitted to my subconscious at the time it happened, for now I remembered it. Why did he drop the card in the mail slot? Perhaps he was symbolically reporting to his spiritual home, reporting to God. It was a dramatic and symbolic separation of himself from his defeat and the turning to a higher power which immediately took him out of himself and healed him. The incident indicates that if there is deep desire, intensity of longing, and a sincere reaching out after the power, that it will be given. In this chapter I have related victory stories out of human experience, each in its own way indicating the continual presence and availability of a life-renewing power, beyond but resident within ourselves. Your problem may not be alcoholism, but the tact that the higher power can heal a person of this most difficult malady emphasizes the tremendous truth related in this chapter and throughout the entire book, that there is no problem, difficulty, or defeat that you cannot solve or overcome by faith, positive thinking, and prayer to God. The techniques are simple and workable, and God will help you always, just as the writer of the following letter was helped. Dear Dr. Peel, when we think of all the wonderful things that have happened to us since we first met you and started coming to the Marble Church, It seems nothing short of a miracle. When you realize that just 6 years ago this month I was totally broke, in fact thousands of dollars in debt, a complete physical washout, and had hardly a friend in the world because of my excess drinking, you can see why we have to pinch ourselves every now and then to realize that our good fortune isn't all a dream. As you well know, alcohol wasn't the only problem I had 6 years ago. It has been said that I was one of the most negative people you ever saw. That's only a half-truth, for I was filled with gripes, all sorts of irritation, and was one of the most supercritical, impatient, cocky individuals that you could have possibly met even in all your travels. Now, please don't think I feel I have overcome all these obsessions. I haven't. I am one of those people that have to do a day-to-day job on myself. But gradually, by trying to follow your teachings, I am learning to control myself and be less critical of my fellow man. And it is like being released from a prison. I just never dreamed that life could be so full and wonderful. Sincerely, Dick. Why not draw upon that higher power? Epilogue. You have finished this book. What have you read? Simply a series of practical and workable techniques for living a successful life. You have read a formula of belief and practice which should help you win victory over every defeat. Examples have been given of people who have believed and who have applied the suggested techniques. These stories have been told to demonstrate that through the same methods you can obtain the same results as they did. But reading is not enough. Now please go back and persistently practice each technique given in this book. Keep at it until you obtain the desired results. I wrote this book out of a sincere desire to help you. It will give me great happiness to know that the book has helped you. I have absolute confidence and belief in the principles and methods outlined in this volume. They have been tested in the laboratory of spiritual experience and practical demonstration. They work when worked. We may never meet in person, but in this book we have met. We are spiritual friends. I pray for you. God will help you, so believe and live successfully. Norman Vincent Peale.